Well, good morning and welcome to our employer forum this morning. Gonna have some great discussion. Got some excellent speakers, got an excellent host, and that's not me, by the way, and a great audience, actually. Nice group of people with various backgrounds in, I think, some related areas. So I'll be interested to see what questions and comments and insight we get through the chat box. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Gareth. I'm one of the directors, one of the founders of First Intuition. So I've been training accountants for just over 25 years, and actually in that quarter of a century, and I know I don't look that old, but in that quarter of a century that I've been training accountants for all the qualifications across AAT, ICAW, ACCA, CIMA, I think the last 3 or 4 years has probably seen more change than the previous couple of decades. And that change is continuing, and if anything, I think getting faster. And in fact, I remember, I'm sure all of us will have been touched quite profoundly by digital technologies, by the emergence of issues such as cybersecurity, cryptocurrency, Bitcoins, NFTs, other digital currencies are becoming, I think, more and more on the radar of accountants in terms of crypto assets. How do you value, how do you report, how do you disclose, how do you tax, perhaps? So there's some real, I think, changes going on in our sector. Exciting times, it's certainly not dull, but it does require, I think, very different skill sets. I do remember going back, and it's probably only 4 years or so, I was chatting to the training partner of one of the big firms, one of the big 4 accountancy firms. And at that time, they told me that they thought that their intakes of trainee accountants were likely to drop 80% over the following 5 years, 80%. So a massive reduction in what they felt they were going to be taking on to train as accountants. Now, that was 3 or 4 years ago. And in fact, if we look forward to today, the opposite is completely true. Nobody has reduced their intakes of accountants. In fact, I'm sure a lot of you will be aware there are not enough qualified accountants around at the moment in any part of the country, in any sector. So actually, from our perspective at First Intuition, we have seen the employers we work with actually recruiting more and more and more. We're seeing booming intakes. I'm a member of the ICAW. In fact, I sit on ICAW Council, and I know the ICAW has had record intakes, I think, for 7 or 8 years in a row. Fiona can probably confirm through the chat box. The ICAW had an intake of over 11,000 new students last year. I remember when there wasn't even 11,000 students in total for the ICAW. So, and I think, the AAT, ACCA, CIMA, they're all seeing similar increases in student intakes. So those fears of the robots taking away accountants and auditors' jobs, I think we're not the case at all. But what we have seen, I think, is that automation, artificial intelligence, digitization, data analytics, it hasn't replaced the need for accountants, but it has changed the roles they play, and it's changed the skills that they require. The way I always think about it is technology doesn't replace humans, it amplifies humans. And in fact, we've got Mark Proctor on the call. He actually talked on one of these employer forums a few months ago. And I remember Mark talking in quite a lot of detail about the way that the technology could actually, and the way he described it was it allows accountants to do the job they were actually trained for. I'm sure particularly those of you who've been in the industry for quite a while will have spent your hours ticking bank statements or rifling through invoices. Fortunately, those kind of low level, that's admin, that's not accountancy. Those low level admin jobs, that's what's being automated. And it's really, I think, releasing accountants to have far more impact, to actually do what we trained for. I didn't train for however many years I trained for as a chartered accountant to tick bank statements, frankly. I wanted to affect businesses and help decision making. And actually, for me, that's what technology does. And, if anything, I think this last 2 or 3 years, particularly under the pandemic and the virtual nature of this last couple of years for a lot of us, has actually probably accelerated a transformation I think probably a lot of us were on anyway. But it's probably, 2 years has probably seen a decade's worth of growth and acceleration and innovation. Now, that's been reflected, I suspect, in a lot of our jobs and a lot of our workplaces. but it's also having an impact in the qualifications. For instance, Becky, one of the speakers, is actually a council member of the AAT. I work extremely closely with the AAT. They've been a booming qualification. We've seen a real trend towards more school leaver programs rather than graduate programs. So, the AAT particularly, I think, forms a great foundation for students to come into the profession. They literally last month launched their new long-awaited 2022 syllabus. And there's a lot of aspects there around digital and data, and they've really brought the syllabus forward in a fantastic way. I think the ICAW, some of you might be aware, the ICAW released a couple of years ago a data analytics certificate. And actually, even within the ICAW qualification, there's now a couple of papers, I think the audit and the corporate reporting papers, that actually have embedded data analytics software. They have a platform called Inflow that some of you might have come across, that students are using in the heat of an exam to actually, look at an artificial data set and actually identify anomalies and suggest where therefore they would guide their audit work. The ACCA, similarly, they have a data analytics certificate of their own that members can use, and they've been updating their qualifications. SEMA had a big syllabus review a few years ago where they brought in a huge amount of some of these new technologies, looking at blockchain, data analytics and the like. So, some significant changes in the qualifications, which is kind of great, but I think there are obvious shortcomings with that. With the best will in the world, regulated qualifications can't change particularly quickly. They can't change at the same pace as the real world. So you can imagine, these qualifications that our trainees are studying, they're not going to be bang up to date in terms of the actual technologies being used at the coal face of accountancy. I think they give a primer, they give a basic understanding, but you probably then need to upskill in more relevant, up-to-date technologies. And obviously those of us that qualified and trained before some of these syllabus evolutions will never have seen this. And in fact, for me, I think, this whole area of digital and data, to me, it kind of upends the normal expectation of knowledge and experience and familiarity. I mean, if you look at tax as an area, you would imagine somebody who's been working as a tax advisor for 20 years, they're going to know an awful lot more, both technically and in terms of advising clients, than somebody who has just qualified. That would seem sensible. With a lot of this digital and data, I think it's almost the other way around, that actually trainees are newly qualified, either because of exposure through the syllabuses they've done, or actually just because of a natural affinity with some of these technologies and the fact they see. I mean, my daughter gets exposed to Python coding at school. I never did that when I was at school, obviously. So I think that, the younger professionals, those who are still training or recently qualified, actually in some respects probably have more familiarity with these areas than their seniors and their partners and their directors and their CFOs. So I think this is an area where actually, excitingly, everybody's probably got something to learn. Everybody probably needs to be exposed to some of these new areas. And in fact, one of our speakers, Becky, I was actually chatting to a few weeks ago, and she said something that stuck with me so much, I wrote it down, actually. I hope you'll forgive me, Becky, but she said, Becky is younger than me, to be fair, but she said she's still got 30 or 40 years of her career left. What will she be doing even in 5 or 10 years, and how different will that be to what she's doing today? And her view was that she needed to embrace change, to not swim against the tide, but to swim with the tide. And in fact, Becky herself, she's going to give us some great insight during the conversation today. But for me, that is actually a key. It's this whole lifelong learning. I've probably learned more in the last year than in any other year of my career, and I'm at the tail end of my career. So what about people who are, far earlier on? So, I think this is such an important conversation. In fact, we are going to be having regular sessions looking at, digital technologies, looking at data analytics. I think we're trying to line one up looking at cybersecurity, an issue that I think accountants probably in the past have left to the IT types. I think realistically, actually, accountants and finance professionals need to take more of a lead in some of these areas. So hopefully we'll see you again for further sessions. But for this session, actually, I want to start by introducing my colleague Louisa, and actually ask Louisa perhaps to give a little bit about her background, because actually I think, Louisa, you are a perfect person in terms of your blended background for coming into this area, aren't you?
Well, thank you very much, Gareth. Very kind of you to say so. Yeah, don't know if that's how I feel, but it's great for that. Thank you. So I'm a chartered accountant by training. I trained quite a while ago, back in London, medium-sized firm Mazar, and I trained in audit and then moved across to forensic accounting, dealing with fraud and error and litigation, which I loved. And then from there moved to Cambridge, which took me into teaching accounting qualifications, which was a good 10+ years ago now. Which I really enjoyed, but then the opportunity came up almost a year ago now, actually, to move into the sphere of digital with First Intuition. So I now lead our digital program, offering our digital courses to essentially people who are qualified and beyond, so the post-qualification area. So yeah, so that's me. And prior to studying as an accountant in accounting, I did a master's in artificial intelligence. So that's the strands. I've always had that tech urge in me. I didn't kind of take the Masters in Artificial Intelligence any further at that stage. Wasn't great timing with the dot-com bubble bursting at that moment, but it led me into accounting, and it's really nice that I can bring the strands together in this role. I'm really enjoying it. So it's been a great opportunity.
Fantastic, Louise. And I still remember the conversation when we were looking for that lead, because we were very aware that this was a growing, developing area in our sector. At First Intuition, we always want to try and support employers and make sure they're able to develop the skills that they need in their organizations, the skills that their teams will need. So, we were keen to, like I use the term thought leader pretty lightly here, but we were keen to try and act as a thought leader in this area to make sure that we were able to support clients and employers as they saw this digital transformation. I remember when you expressed the interest in leading that and explained how you had this background of both being an accountant and artificial intelligence, and I thought, well, that seems absolutely perfect, because that's exactly what we're trying to do, is to actually provide upskilling, not for data scientists. I would stress, this is not about high tech courses. This is about upskilling finance professionals, so very much accountancy flavored. Now, actually, Louise, what made you want to take on that role leading our digital programs?
I think for me, so it was the opportunity to help others with these exciting opportunities that are available in business right now, really to be at the forefront and sort of forward facing. I think I really enjoy, rather than just sort of focusing on looking backwards. That was what was the real appeal for me.
Fantastic. Now, we've actually been developing the programs, and we've kind of launched them pretty recently, but we've been developing these programs for a couple of years, really. You've been very heavily involved, obviously, Louisa. Our colleague Crystal, that some of the audience might have come across. Crystal's been involved in a lot of developments over the last few years, both with AAT, with apprenticeships, with our leadership and management programs, and now with our digital and data programs. And actually, we are at a point, I know we've run a variety of pilot courses recently that a lot of our clients have been, helpful enough to attend and give us feedback on, which have been really exciting. Do you want to just explain how we're teaching data literacy at First Intuition, Louisa?
Yes, of course. So how we've shaped the programme, we've shaped it similar to the accounting qualifications in terms of having a level 1 programme to develop a platform of common knowledge, which is our Digital Finance Essentials course. And the aim is very much journey before tools. So rather than focusing on one particular tool, one particular bit of software, it's moving right away from that to understand really what's going on in the world right now, what the opportunities are, and how to harness those opportunities. So we look at where we are right now, thinking about the change that Gareth was alluding to in recent times, and then where we can go from here in terms of automation, and in terms of using machine learning and artificial intelligence for like data analytics, for example. And then about new technologies like blockchain and how that's coming in, and a bit about crypto and things as well, cryptocurrency. And then we really think about the change how we can get there in terms of that journey and the skills we need to get there, and actually how often it's actually a small amount of tech skills, but a lot of other skills that we've already got that we can harness, sort of the impact skills, the softer skills that we can all take advantage of in that process. So that's our Digital Finance Essentials course. And then we've got a level 2 course on data analytics, which is a 2-day course. And so in that course, it's really drilling into the opportunities out there, thinking about what data is and big data, and then what we mean by analytics and the different levels of analytics we can do. And as accountants, we all do analytics already, we all analyze, but it's just thinking about the changes we can make, the improvements we can make at the different opportunities there, and bringing in tools with that for the so a bit of artificial and machine learning to be able to look forward and start making predictions in certain areas is a great opportunity. So that's the level 2 course we're running, and then we're building some level 3 courses where we do then drill into the tools. And so currently we're working on Power Query, and I can see we've got Mark Proctor in the audience. Thank you, Mark, who's working with us yes, with, as Gareth mentioned, his MVP is fantastic there. So we're working there on the Power Query, and we're looking at bringing in other tools at that level as well to meet that demand for example, data analytics, the skills, the tools that we require. So yeah, so that's a little bit about our program.
Fabulous. And actually, I mean, I love that journey before tools strapline that we use, because I remember when this first kicked off a couple of years ago, it was because a client came to us saying, can you train our staff in Python? You know, Python, some of you will be aware, a data analytics coding language. Can you train our staff in Python? And we asked them, why? What do you want them to do with it? And they said, we don't know. We've just heard of this thing. We need training in it. And I had another client say, oh, we need training in Power BI. And I said, what do you want to do with it? And they said, we don't know. We just need training in Power BI. And, you know, for me, that's the danger in this area, is you jump into the tools, you jump into the very techie bit. And a lot of the employers I've talked to in recent months on this area will describe what I would suggest is almost like pockets of expertise in their organization. So you'll have one person who does know Python and uses a bit of Python, and maybe the people they work directly with pick a little bit up from them, but people in the next room, in the next team, have never heard of it. Somebody else in the organization will use Power Query, but only because they've watched a few YouTube videos and upskilled themselves. So there's no consistency, there's no congruence, there's no overall picture of what they're trying to achieve. And this is why when we sat down a couple of years ago thinking, how would we actually approach our programs, we almost wanted to back off to think, well, there's no point teaching people the tools if they don't know what they're trying to do and what they're trying to achieve, what questions they're trying to answer. So this was this logic of this level 1, 2, and 3 that builds up gradually to, well, we will train tools, but only once you know what you're going to try and use with them. The other thing I think is very evident, and that you picked up on there, Louisa, is that, and the thing that's kind of surprised me, because there is a bit of, you know, reluctance in some sectors to upskill in these areas. And I think it's often born out of fear. I think a lot of people think it's going to be highly technical. It's going to be, you know, lots of very, very complicated coding. But the thing that surprised me is just how many digital skills are actually not technical skills. They are softer skills. I mean, you know, I've sat in on a few of the debriefs you've held with participants in our pilot programs, Louisa, and the number of them that have raved about the half-day session on storytelling is absolutely fantastic. And storytelling is a fundamental part of a finance professional's role, and it's obviously about taking data from a system, you know, using appropriate charts to illustrate your point, and then actually making an impact with the story. Not technical, you know, that's a skill that we could probably all do with just in our daily lives. So yes, you know, I think some very interesting insights that have been coming out. I mean, in terms of the pilots we've run, and I know you've already run a couple of bespoke programs. In fact, you were running a bespoke program for News UK over the last couple of days, weren't you, Louise? I mean, you know, how have the clients who've either been on the pilots or been participants in the bespoke programs, how have they been finding them so far?
I think finding them really useful and yeah, really interesting. I think it's a chance to reflect and to sort of take stock and work out where to go, and work with other people maybe they work with as well, and find yeah, ways to make changes. And I think yeah, I just think it's been that great opportunity to have that time to reflect and to make some plans. And very much something we do in our courses is we make sure we set a short-term goal and a long-term goal. And the short-term goal is something we can absolutely go in action with a very small amount of effort. And I know it's something that Hannah's very passionate about. We were chatting about this the other day, the power of marginal gains, and I know it's something that Hannah's keen to speak about later as well. So making that small change that we can go and implement straight away, and how that can lead to the bigger changes, to start bringing down that fear factor and the thought about it being such a huge project, and knowing where to start and how to get to the end goal of whether it's digital transformation, whatever it might be.
Fantastic. And you know, I've been very excited by the feedback that's been coming in, particularly because I know that within the courses there are very tangible takeaways, and they go away with objectives, short-term objectives, long-term objectives. And I love talking to delegates afterwards and hearing their stories of what they've been actually implementing in the workplace and the time that they've been saving. And in fact, that's another point I thought I'd quiz you about, Louisa, because at the moment the finance sector, I think it's fair to say, is stretched. You know, the story I hear time and time again is too much work, not enough people. And, you know, I suspect most of us on the call would resonate with that. And obviously, when you are very, very busy, it can be hard to free up time to engage with new stuff, even if you know it's actually going to benefit you. It's that irony of you can't commit time to look at something that will save you time. which I think is the story of my life at sometimes, if I'm perfectly honest. But I mean, in terms of blockers, because I know we've been having, you know, very positive feedback on the course, is there any sort of blockers you're finding that are getting in the way of employers being able to engage with these areas?
I think, as you say, I think time is certainly one of them, and I think potentially even more than cost, time feels like such a big issue, and it's something we do discuss in the programme. Like I was saying, like Hannah and I were talking about the power of the marginal gain, so we can just start to make small changes and chip away at it. And then potentially that sort of fear factor, like you mentioned, of not really knowing what's out there, what's possible, how to get there. Potentially people at different stages of their career having different knowledge, maybe people coming in, younger people coming in, like you mentioned about your daughter, and I know my daughter as well is learning Python already. So we've got this new generation coming through with all these skills, which some of us may not have. And so it's how we can take advantage and use those skills and help everyone in this journey. And I think there's something in it for everybody in this journey. We can all play our role. It's just, you know, everyone sort of working out what their role is going to be. It doesn't necessarily mean we have to be data scientists, like you mentioned earlier, Gareth. So I think that, yeah, those that sort of feel like the big blockers to me, I think.
Fantastic. And I mean, I know, you know, delegates on the pilots you've been running and the course you've been running, you've had from people who are still training or newly qualified all the way up to partners and directors attending your courses. And, you know, from what I understand, everyone is taking something valuable away.
Oh, you just dipped out there, Gareth. Hopefully you'll be coming back again. But that, I think, is probably a brilliant moment for us to move on and introduce our speakers who are going to be with us, who are with us today. So thank you very much to our speakers for joining us today. We've got 4 speakers with us today. We have got Craig Sirk from FITT Technologies, and we've got Becky Glover from VNC Automotive, and we've got Joe Fitzsimons from the ACCA, and Hannah Earls from Cambridge Assessment. And if it's okay, I might just ask each of you in turn just to introduce yourselves, just give a little bit of chat about your backstory would be fantastic. So let's go over to Craig. Craig, could you introduce yourself?
Okay, good morning. I'm the CDO at FITT Technologies, which is the leading source for UK property information. So my entire life is pretty much data and how we can use it for decision making, help our clients exploit it. I qualified as a chartered accountant last century. We'll draw the line there. But this century, I've been working on information exploitation, whether it's change, implementing systems, processes, BI teams, corporate finance, etc., etc. I've worked at places like British Gas, so I've worked with data at scale and the atomic weapons establishments. I've worked with data at high national security levels, both of which have their own challenges. Excuse me. And data literacy is something I'm very passionate about. So looking forward to this morning.
Thank you very much, Craig. That's really, really interesting to hear about. That's brilliant. I'll look forward to hearing that more of your experiences through this morning. That's brilliant. And let's go over to Becky. Hello, Becky. Perhaps you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, so as you've said already, I'm Becky Glover. I work for VNC Automotive. We are based in Cambridge and we're a software company. So we predominantly put softwares into cars, lorries, that sort of thing. So we're actually quite a small team still. So we were a startup spin out about 4 years ago. There's probably about 30 of us at the moment, quite a small finance team, which is where we are quite passionate about data, getting the best out of the data, using AI, things like that, just to try and help us out, which is why I sort of came down this route, and it really grabbed me. I actually qualified in practice. I did AAT and an ACCA with first intuition with Gareth many years ago. So I've known the team for quite some time. But in addition to my role at VNC Automotive, their finance director, I'm recently appointed to AAT Council as well, which gives me a slightly different view on things. And also in my free time, whenever that is, I also co-founded a online wine merchant as well. So we use data to make a lot of decisions in that too, because we are very time strapped when we're sort of running around doing loads of different things as well. So yeah, I think it's going to be a really interesting discussion today. Can't wait. I mean, there's loads of people on this call which I think are just going to have so much knowledge and understanding, and I just can't wait to hear everyone's views on things, because As Gareth said, and as Louisa said, there's so much change in this area at the moment. So just to harness and capture some of that will be fantastic.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Becky. That's really, really great to hear about that. And I look forward to hearing more about it through this morning. Thank you. And let's go over to Joe. Hello to Joe. Could you introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. Good morning, everyone. My name is Joe Fitzsimons. So I'm a policy manager at the Association of Chartered and Certified Accountants, and I lead on a variety of different policy areas, including education and skills specifically. And so a core element of my role is really looking at the skills that organizations need today, but also, of course, looking into the future at how that's evolving and what the future skills needs will be and are. And how individuals can develop those skills through various different initiatives and what kind of support is required. In a previous role, I led the education and skills policy and university engagement over at the Institute of Directors. So skills and looking at those future skills needs is very much the thing that excites me, and data analytics and all of this area being very core to that. And so really I work with our members to understand the challenges they're facing and then seek to influence some of those policy decisions that are made on their behalf. But delighted to be here. Thanks very much for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Joe. It's fantastic to have you with us. Thank you. And let's go over to Hannah. How about you, Hannah? Tell us about yourself.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I will second that. Lovely to see you all here today. So my name is Hannah Earls, and this is the best title ever. Is a Director of Finance, Management, Information, Data and Analytics. So quite relevant to what we're going to talk about today. I work for Cambridge University Preston Assessment. So we're all about education, obviously. I think I'm best known for an accountant with passion for data and analytics. I think it's quite a mix. Like you said before, things have changed. So becoming an accountant who knows how to deal with data is quite a hot topic. So I was very lucky to have that. So I'm a qualified accountant. I've got masters in finance, but most of my career I spent with data and statistics and data modeling and stuff like that. So I really dedicated my time to implement that sort of view in finance, which is very exciting. So yeah, thank you for having me today.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Hannah. And as it happens, you're going to answer our first question, if that's all right, Hannah. So yeah, so let's crack on. So as you know, this webinar today is, do we all need data literacy skills? So I think it'd be great if we talk about what we actually mean by data literacy, first of all, because it may not be a term that we necessarily come across that much, and it could mean different things to different people. So Hannah, perhaps you could tell us about what you understand by data literacy.
That is a good question to start with, isn't it? So like Gareth said before, we have data everywhere, whether it's at home with our mobile phones or at work on computers, and you can't get away from it. So you have to learn how to deal with it, how to read it, and how to work with it. So the official definition of data literacy is be able to read, understand, create, and communicate data as information. What that means for me is basically turning raw data into insight to support decision making, whether it's at home or at work, it's just data. I've got some interesting examples what that means in practice. I've got one, I do that every day in the morning. So before I get up, I look at my phone and say, oh, what's the weather going to be like? Weather is data. So if I see a rainy cloud, that's data. I can turn it into insight, think, I might need an umbrella when I go today. And my decision will be, okay, do I stay at home or do I actually go with that umbrella? More relevant to work example would be, obviously, COVID probably hit us the hardest, and having access to data to check that impact of COVID was amazing. So probably the most touched data that we did during COVID times was revenue. So revenue is data, what insight we can get from it. So if we can read that insight from it, whether it did hit us, how much, when, by who, how long it's going to last, we can then turn it into insight to maybe even predict the future, see how long it's going to last for, what does it mean for us as an organization, and then make a decision accordingly. So if you're able to do that with data, it means that you're a data literate person.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I love the point you make about we all use data in our daily lives without thinking about it, don't we? I mean, looking out the window right now, the rain has started. So definitely day for needing an umbrella, isn't it? But then I'm giving those insights to where it's used in businesses. That's really fantastic to hear about. So thank you. Really appreciate that. That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Hannah. Great. Well, let's go over to Craig. Craig, what do you see as the benefits of greater data literacy skills?
Where do you start? That's a great definition from Hannah. Thank you. So I mean, for looking at accountants, it's the chance to stay relevant. Yeah, I hear what Gareth says about yeah, it frees us to do our jobs, but those jobs keep changing a lot. Yeah. And if I think back to what I was doing in the early 90s as a trainee chartered accountant, virtually all of that has gone away now because it can all be automated. It's all in audit tools, etc., etc. So the prime benefit for accountants is the chance to stay relevant. Yeah, storytelling, yeah, the ability to interpret, create insight. And if you look at where reporting standards are going, I'm on the ICAW Data and Analytics Advisory Group. Just 2 weeks ago, we were discussing the EU non-financial reporting directives and equivalents. They're heading your way. If you're in a large company, they're already there. They'll be coming to everybody over the next few years. And they're going to reach down through your organization and into your supply chain. And that's going to change the way that we do our reporting. It's going to put a much greater emphasis on non-financial things. So as the ICAW VP said in the meeting, it's moving accountants from using our skill sets for finance only to look at finance, environment, decisions, everything. So the skill set we've got is great. We just need to apply it on a broader field. But for me, one of the key reasons, if not the primary reason we collect data, is to make decisions. So if we think about data literacy in that context, there's many benefits, because from an accountant's point of view, you can either be, and I looked at finance business partner adverts last night on read.co.uk just to get a feel for what they were currently looking for. Every one of them mentions advanced Excel, most of them mention VBA. Actually, yeah, if you're that sort of business partner that pops up once a month to say, here's the difference between two fictional sets of numbers, one that's very out of date called a budget and one that's slightly out of date called a forecast, you're not going to have a great deal of engagement with your business. But if you're working with them on their decisions, helping them make better decisions, you're going to get much greater organization, greater value add, greater recognition, greater job satisfaction. And some of the things that we need to think about, if you're going to understand and support a decision with data, you need to understand the context, understand the process that's generating it, the risk around the decision maker personality. I've worked with a lot of nuclear engineers over the years. They are somewhat more risk averse than the salespeople I've worked with and need a very different, more comprehensive set of data before they're willing to take an action. And the quality and the timeliness of data that's needed. If you're running a pilot, having some quick and dirty data you've pulled off the web and haven't cleaned or anything is sufficient to say, yeah, it supports my gut call. Let's go with it. As Colin Powell said in his leadership lessons, yeah, once you've got the information to a probability of 70% or so, go with your gut, because a lot of the information data is great, but it's not the be all and end all. Some of the key challenges we face in business can't be solved with data. Yeah, and there's a great book by a guy called Frank Boytendijk called Dealing with Dilemmas. I won't try and spell the surname now, I've only got a few minutes, but if you search Frank Dealing with Dilemmas, it'll bring that up, and he looks at the strategic decision making that can be informed by data, but certainly has a lot of other aspects too. So for accountants, you've got better understand the business, the context, being able to help people think differently. Some of the things if you go into a board meeting in a typical company, it's the same board pack in the same meeting room, everyone's sitting in the same seats every month, having the same conversations. If you change the way they look at the data, or even just the context of that meeting by putting, say, a large stuffed monkey, toy obviously, on the boardroom table so they walk in, it creates a bit of cognitive dissonance. It means that they start looking at things in a different way. We did that to one board 1 month, the next month we took their chairs away. Yeah, and it got them out of their rut. And just even something simple like writing agendas as questions rather than topics. Typical board meeting says finance update. Oh, good, 20 minutes of dense slides filled with lots of tables and numbers. If you rewrite that as, are we on track with finance? You can say, yes, great, that's 20 minutes of everyone's time gone back. So by being data literate and thinking about the decisions that need to be made, you can put it all in a different context. For decision makers, there's a lot of benefits. Primary one is they get a reduction in their cognitive burden. The brain is a muscle. You spend a lot of time on looking at, is this data good enough? Have I got the right things I need to make the decision? That's going to wear you out before you actually get to focus on those critical decisions, actually making the decisions, looking at the non-data aspects. So we can give them more time to focus on that, more mental energy. If you've got that, you get new insights and opportunities. And so one of those opportunities is to avoid their Vasa moment. The Vasa was a 17th century Swedish warship that sank within a couple of hundred yards of its setting off on its first voyage, because no one thought about the boundaries of the data that they were using to design it. I'll spare you the details, you can search it on the web, but essentially they built it too high. No one thought about needing more ballast, it fell over. Whoops, sank. So helping people understand the boundaries of the data they've got. It may work for this decision, it may not work for this one. Oh, and if they're not feeling so mentally tired, if they've got more time to focus on the decisions they need, if they're getting new insights and opportunities to drive their function, whatever, forwards, and they're less risk of having a Vasa moment, they're probably going to get more enjoyment in their role. Yeah, so that's a key benefit, helping make people smilier from data literacy. For the organisation, I'm a Lean Six Sigma Green Belt with Lockheed Martin from years ago. There are 8 wastes of Lean Six Sigma. Downtime is the acronym. Won't go into it now, but if you can stop people overproducing data, having to wait for data, having to go scroll up and down a dashboard screen to find the data that they need, then that's all got to help. It's all got to help with decision making. If you get better decision making, you've got a reduction in risk, increase in opportunities, improve cash flow and probability. One thing I did at one organisation, and I've worked at more organisations that are on my LinkedIn CV, so don't try and guess which one it is, was to say, how can we improve profitability and cash flow? Yeah, typical accountancy, bad debt provision says, how old is the debt? Let's write off an increasing proportion of it, provide against an increasing proportion of it. If you can use machine learning, you can use your data to demonstrate that actually these are the this is the risk profile of each debtor. You can then provide against the riskiest debtors, regardless of how old their debt is. And the company we did that in, had a material impact on their financial statements for the year, because they could release over half their bad debt provision by just using data to make decisions in a smarter way about who to provide for. And if you've got happier people and a better, leaner, less wasteful organisation, then your users, customers, are going to have better accounts, are going to have better outcomes, they're going to get better service, and you're more likely to get onto a virtuous circle of improving outcomes, improving growth, etc.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Craig. I love the many things you mentioned just then. I think domain knowledge is something that really stands out for me, that as accountants we mustn't forget our domain knowledge. It's so important that we can bring that together with the data. It's not as though we need to shift to just dealing with data, do we? We really need to fuse the two together. And like how you were mentioning about data and also gut instinct, and not losing that gut instinct, but again using the data driven decisions with the gut instinct, I think is fantastic, because I think there's a lot of literature out there which is talking about we've got to make data driven decisions, and there's maybe a bit of fear factor about that, but actually we can use that alongside our gut instincts as well. I think that's fantastic. So yeah, thank you very much for that. That's brilliant. Now let's go to Hannah. Hannah, I'd love to hear what your views are on whether we think that all accountants should improve their data literacy skills, or whether it's just a subset of accountants.
Great question, and thank you, Greg. There's some excellent examples to say why we should. I'm not going to jump in and say yes. I'll let you to decide. Just going to give you, maybe summarize a few benefits that can benefit you and your organization. As you know, data is everywhere. We have to deal with it, but also data is seen as an asset, an enabler. So if we deal with that, we know how to deal with it, then we become an asset and enabler. So few key benefits, very simple for the organization, is you're able to make quicker decisions and better decisions. You're able to respond to risks and opportunities better, and basically become more competitive. So they are the obvious signs for organization. And if you work for that organization, you probably will benefit from it yourself, because your company won't go bust and you'll get income. As a person, obviously, work is more fun, like Greg said. I can actually do the fun things rather than spending time gathering and checking the data. It's done for you if you use the right tools, and then you can just go and play. Another big benefit is when you go into the room and you know how to read the data, you ask better questions, you can make better comments, you can make better decisions, whether it's at home or at work. It really works that way. I think the key thing as well is you're more employable, because where we're heading, dealing with data is definitely the future. We can't escape it. So if you have the skills, you'll go to the companies that value that, or you will be retained at the company that values that. So you're definitely more employable. And the last one for me, that's quite a handy one. You can apply all the skills outside of work. So I don't know if any of you use Excel for holiday planning or evaluating which car to buy. I do that a lot. But also if you have a fitness tracker, you can then look at it and say, oh, do I need that extra donut or should I go on a bike instead? So having those skills is really, really helpful. So I'll let you to decide whether we all should have it, but that's my point of view. Thank you.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you for that. That's such a good point, Hannah. As you say, making those decisions on fitness as well. It's things we're doing all the time, isn't it? And just if we can take it up a step, that's brilliant. That's great. So Craig, what are your thoughts about if we don't improve our data literacy skills?
Well, as I said, if we don't improve them, we become increasingly irrelevant. We go the way of the typing pool. Yeah, you don't see many of those anymore, not even in the government departments I've worked with over the years. Yeah, we could be, yeah, even some of the, if people stop coming to us for the basics, then, yeah, and we can't provide the basics, then we don't have the right to try and get involved in the more important, sexier stuff, if you want to call it that. I mean, 15 years ago, I put an ERP system in at one company. And one of the things that the decision makers loved was a simple dashboard that showed what their current purchase orders were. They'd not had sight of that before. They were all managing it in different ways. Now we gave them a dashboard that said, this is every purchase order you've raised, its current status, how much you've still got to spend. And they just love that. Yeah, because they could then say, oh, hang on, I'm about to run out on this consulting thing. I need to get something in place rather than losing them for a month until it grinds, the paperwork grinds through. So yeah, if we don't improve it, we become increasingly irrelevant. When you look at, even when I was training in 93 to 96, the accountants were marketing themselves as business advisors. What that means, oh, that's an interesting comment from James. I'll read it in detail shortly, but yeah, what does that mean? It means, as I said, we've got all those different opportunities to understand. But if we look at data literacy through the lens of decision comfort, which is a term I came up with when I was doing my master's on knowledge management for innovation a few years ago, it's not about making everyone comfortable with the decisions, or rather that they're easy decisions. It's about making sure they're comfortable with the data they've got and it's provided in the right context. So if I just share my screen briefly, they say a picture's worth 1,000 words, and I've only got a few minutes, so I shall, thank you, there we go, right, slideshow. Right, so putting data in context and how the data literacy can, can help. Yeah, it's all about, the decisions we're making are all about delivering outcomes for our organisation, whatever it is. Those outcomes are generally through performance management allocated to an individual role. That role has a number of accountabilities within it, and those accountabilities are generally exercised by making decisions. Those decisions will, to a greater or lesser extent, be informed by data, which is generated by processes. So with having a real example, yeah, and a key outcome for any organisation is let's not run out of cash. That's allocated to the CFO finance director role. The accountability is cash management. The decision is what the working capital policies we're going to apply. How do we invest any spare cash overnight, etc. The data you need is sales, bad debts, credit payment schedules, interest rates, all the things that we're all very familiar with. And that those are generated by those processes. But what we need to do, and there's a great book, The Other Side of Innovation by Trimble and Govindarajan, which talks about having a performance engine and an innovation engine. When we're talking about increasing data literacy, we're on that innovation engine side. Small team trying to make a change. The performance engine is the organisation that has optimised itself, or believes it has anyway, over years to deliver its outcomes more efficiently. So if you try and make a change, you're pushing against the weight of people's careers, the organisational culture, all of that stuff. So by thinking about it in this way, you can align what we're doing with data literacy to the board and the strategy team for the outcomes, HR and org design for the roles and accountabilities. If you're a regulated sector, regulatory compliance team, we're very happy because you're thinking about the accountabilities, how you can provide the information. From the data point of view, you can engage with the CDO and CIO. And if you're talking about improving processes and how data can flow better through those, then you're getting into the change team, the Lean Six Sigma team, the functions across the business. So by thinking about it this way, you're aligning with all the different parts of the organization of that performance engine, so that you're working with them rather than trying to impose a change on them. And nobody, I'd be surprised if anyone does on the call, works for an organization where people are sitting around boards waiting for a data literacy program to fill their days. If we don't align with those existing structures and capabilities, we're not going to succeed. So if we take that approach, and we have, which we won't necessarily have if we don't improve our data literacy in the broader context, then we can use those existing teams, those existing processes, those existing performance capabilities to become force multipliers for us and make the data literacy grow across the organization.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Craig. That's a really great insight. And I love that slide and the way you've done that process, showing how it affects everybody, and it's, yeah, for everyone to get involved with. That's brilliant. Thank you. Let's go over to Joe. Joe, I'd love to hear your thoughts on, because there's a myriad of different things we can do to improve our data literacy skills, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on what skills we should improve and where we should start.
Thanks very much. Well, I think there's been so much great content there already, so I'll really only be building in on some of that, some of those points that have already been made. I think to answer this, I'd like to very briefly just reflect on the journey that we've been through in the profession, and some of the comments that Gareth made at the very start there relating to the role of technology and that sort of fear that sometimes is inbuilt in us, and how overcoming that can really work to our advantage. And I'd like to particularly highlight one report that we jointly produced with EY. So it shines a light on sort of how the profession can pivot and how individuals in the profession pivot their work towards sort of greater digital adoption. So I'll share a link to that in the chat just in case people would like to have a closer look. That I won't have enough time to sort of go through in great detail for all of it. But I'd like to just very briefly share a slide that hopefully helps illustrate the story, the small story I'd like to tell. So I'll just do that now. So if you just let me know when you can see the slide, hopefully it's appearing any moment now.
Yeah, that's good. We can see it, Joe. Thank you.
Great. So on this slide, you'll notice that across the bottom we have the number of ACCA members in existence at a given point in time over a number of years, and these individuals work across all sectors and organizations of all sizes around the world, as you'd expect. If you look particularly at the middle part of the chart, where we have the Excel application and the desktop computer, during that time in the 80s, spreadsheets became very popular, as we know, and prior to that, a lot of our profession would have really relied on paper, pens and calculators for computational purposes. When spreadsheets came in, there was sort of a lot of fear about really what this meant, because professionals very much in the profession viewed the sort of work they did as the value add being their ability to conduct those computations in a really complex way. And here were spreadsheets sort of providing a more elegant alternative that allowed complex computations to be done, and you could visualize things cleanly, and it was correct every time, and replicate a lot of different scenarios in a more efficient way. But actually, alongside the spreadsheets came that desktop computer evolution, and for the first time in history, it was really possible for anyone to have a computer in their possession, whereas before that would have been a lot rarer and a lot more difficult. And those two things in combination, of course, meant that you had a really intelligent piece of software, being the spreadsheet, that could be available across organizations in a very mass scalable way. But there was a lot of fear about what this meant for professional accountants and finance professionals. If you fast forward 30 or 40 years, you see that one of the biggest users of spreadsheets is the finance and accountancy community. And this has really demonstrated an ability to partner with the technology to amplify their own effectiveness and their own value proposition. And the number of ACCA members at the start of the process was about 25,000. That doubled to 50,000 by 1996 as the sort of process reached significant maturity. And if you look at sort of future waves of technology evolution, this doubled again to 100,000 when new developments like mobile technology and the internet took hold, and then again from 100 to 200,000 as cloud computing and smartphones took hold. So the point I'm trying to sort of illustrate here, and it's illustrated very elegantly in this particular report, is about that narrative around technology and automation being fundamentally a threat that's going to wipe out jobs is really a very, very one-sided argument, and the reality is a lot more nuanced. What we're talking about really is that partnership in a situation where accountancy professionals and all professionals have the opportunity to engage and partner with technology through the lens of opportunity and continue building on that successful partnership we've had in past history. But I think a really key point here is about what the human element, or what the human brings to that partnership. So when we think about things like more advanced technologies, so artificial intelligence, machine learning, and what they might mean for the accountancy professional, it can mean sort of amplifying and being able to do certain tasks that we couldn't do before. So one example that I'll just mention is carrying out very, very advanced predictive modeling, where you have variables that are quite dynamic and you want to test multiple scenarios that could change over time. Machine learning can be quite effective at dealing with this relative to a very static rules-based forecasting model. And similarly for fraud detection, if you've got sort of a huge number of financial transactions and the fraud vectors keep changing, we know that sort of fraudsters don't do the same kind of fraud again and again. They might have a defining feature such as the amount or the geography from which they trade and so forth, but they keep changing these things. Well, actually, machine learning is quite dynamic at testing various fraud vectors in a very sort of dynamic and adaptable way. So again, the question this sort of begs is what does the human partnership bring with this relationship with technology? So if you look at that particular example around sort of machine learning in the context of dynamic forecasting models that I just touched on, it can be argued that there's at least there are many sort of very important areas where the human side of the partnership is indispensable. But the one I'll highlight is around managing for downside risk protection. So when we talk about this, if you imagine that the model has lots of different parameters which it's using, those parameters are used to produce certain outputs, but ultimately the model is only as good as the inputs that go into it and which ones are either emphasized or de-emphasized. It's perfectly possible to game a model. So ultimately there's a really important role there for assurance for what these kinds of systems are telling us. And the role of ethics and trust comes through a lot stronger than you might initially realize. So it's really about sort of relying on human capability and the human contribution to bring this ethics and trust into the system. And so I think the other thing to just mention on this is when you link back to assurance, there's a large influencing skill role here as well, because of course the modeling will present you with multiple scenarios, but actually it's down to that professional who's presenting those scenarios to an organization to help the organization navigate the various options and the information presented to be able to reach the best outcome. So I think I'll just stop sharing my slide now.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Joe. That's really interesting. You can look forward to reading that report. So thank you for sharing the link for that. And I think Gemma shared the link in the chat. So thank you, to you both there. That's fascinating. So what do you think about how we can improve data literacy skills across the whole organisation? What are your thoughts on that, Joe?
I think keeping things simple where possible when we think about data literacy is really helpful, and I think that's been really eloquently put earlier when we talked about sort of the various places where you already access and use data on a day-to-day basis. So I think that there's sort of four key things I'll just mention, and the first one is making sure that you're clear about the data owner. So making sure that there's that clarity around who's in charge of data at sort of all organizational levels. So that people know where to go when they have questions about data, and they know where to find data, and that ownership needs to be really clearly defined. The second one would be around using tools that people in your organization can understand. So if there are particular sort of tools that you think are particularly critical to the work that you do, just making sure that they are, either included in onboarding processes, that there's time built into people's schedule to be able to sort of upskill on those tools, that there's ongoing sort of refreshing training on those kinds of tools and so on. I think that that's really important. The third point I'd make is around sort of encouraging learning. So really having an environment that, again, makes space for that learning experience, that rewards learning and sort of progressive thinking. And really this comes back to the culture of the organization and making sure that people feel empowered to do that. And the fourth point, I think, again, very heavily leaning on the culture and so on within the organization, is around encouraging questions about data interpretation. So often when data is presented, you have that sort of, there's that sort of inbuilt sort of desire to rely very heavily on what the data is telling us and to really take the data at face value, but actually having a culture where people feel empowered to question what the data is telling us and to really think outside the box. I think that's the fourth sort of point I'd make. But I think keeping it as simple as possible and making sure that people feel empowered to sort of to come forth and ask for support or ask for help or highlight sort of concerns, that really comes back to the core sort of the foundation of successful data interpretation across an organization.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Joe. Yeah, and I love that, those 4 points you made. And something was just standing out for me while you were saying that was tools about them being easy to use and the benefit of refresher training as well, because it's easy to have training up front, but then there's always more we can do with software, isn't there? There are other add-on features and so on we can always get to grips with. So it's having those, refresher training can be really helpful, or sharing tips with other people. If you've got the pocket of knowledge, I think we referred to earlier, someone else can benefit other people in the organization as well. So that's fantastic. And yeah, that's really great. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing those insights to us. I really appreciate that. Brilliant. Well, let's go over to Becky. So hello to Becky, and you're going to chat to us, let me just see, about the mindset in terms of and to help us on this journey to help have successful change. Yes, if you could talk to us about the mindset, that'd be fantastic. Thank you, Becky.
Yeah, thank you. Wow, gosh, there's been so much interesting stuff come out of today. I feel like my brain is full already. Kind of raise to start with, actually, just off the back of that, is I think, this sort of data literacy shift to data in our day-to-day sort of jobs is really important. But what we must remember is that everyone that's on this think tank this morning obviously has a level of interest in it already to even join. And I think so we just need to consider and remember that just because we're interested in it and we're quite open to it because we're all here, it doesn't necessarily mean that the other people in our organisation and that other people in our team are going to be quite with it. Some people, especially outside of finance, if you start talking to them about data and raw data and all of this sort of stuff, they're going to go, oh my god, like this is starting to sound a little bit technical, and automatically back off. So I think we just need to kind of soften some language around it for some people, and just be aware that just because we're quite brave with it, that not everyone else will be. So that's the first thing I would like to just raise and to highlight. But I think things that people consider around data literacy is that it might be this big project, and so they might come away from something like this and go, right, that's it, this sounds amazing, I'm going to implement XYZ and it's going to be brilliant, and think of it in like this project kind of view. But what I would like to consider is, could we just take smaller steps? So could we say, okay, someone mentioned in the meeting the other day they'd quite like to understand this a little bit better. And so one thing that I would raise, so sort of in my slightly different life as a wine merchant owner, we really try and tap into kind of free advertising. And when I say that, I mean the joys of social media. So we delve in massively to social media and what we've posted and how many people that's reached, because we consider that to be like free advertising. So we have decided that every time we look at something, we delve into it a little bit more. So we pull out that data of who's looked, what demographic are they, what age are they, what sex are they, and then we iterate. So I think what we need to do is take really small steps on this journey, not to look at it as this big project. It's going to be great, we're going to change this, because I think that's where the issues come. If we can just pick the tiniest thing, and actually I think people think they're picking a small thing sometimes, and then they start delving into it and it kind of grows arms and legs, and all of a sudden you've got this big beast and it's all a bit overwhelming. And then we need to step back again and go, no, small pieces are what's going to make this great. Because what we can do then by taking a really small piece is iterate. So we go, okay, well, actually that data isn't quite telling us what we thought it was going to tell us. What do we need to change within the data, within the sort of storytelling, but then also within the business? Because that in itself is quite large. Then we can iterate, change it up again, and continue on our path. So I think as well as having this sort of open, broad mind about like, yeah, we're going to change, we're good with change, we're sort of in a safe place of failure, we then need to make those small steps. And I think that's what people maybe take on a little bit more. And we have to remember, we've got full-time jobs, a lot of us. And what we're trying to do is make it better, make the business better, make our decisions better. We're not trying to give ourselves 2 full-time jobs, because that's just going to crumble and no one's going to win. So yeah, mindset, it's got to be open. You've got to be flexible with it. We've got to create this safe space to fail. And that does come from the top, but not just the top as in CEO level. It also comes from the top as in, you know, your department head, maybe even just line manager. So I think everyone can try and create that safe space for people to try out these things, and to take the data, maybe play around with it and see what we can find that's a little bit different. So yeah, mindset is everything. And I know you guys cover this on your courses, and I think it is really, really important aspect, because if we don't have the right mindset and we jump into something, you're pretty much destined to fail on it anyway.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Thank you, Becky. And I know something you've spoken about recently is learning from failure, isn't it? So perhaps you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I guess it's part of this mindset, isn't it? That, yeah, we're all open to change, and yeah, we want to do different things. And I mean, as Gareth mentioned earlier, I've said to him in the past that, you know, I've got 30, 40 years left of my career, and I know it's not going to look the same now. So we need the change. We need to be comfortable with that change in ourselves. Otherwise, we will be left behind, and sort of left on the shelf of recruitment, if you like. So learning from failure is really important. Again, really tricky, I think, for people to do, because if you've had something that hasn't quite gone that well, you kind of want to just forget about it. You want to push it under the rug and go, oh God, that was awful, let's not talk about that one again. But actually, something that's really good to do, if you can kind of get over that phase of, God, I never want to talk about this again, we can pick that apart. And that's something that I really enjoy now doing, because I've done it a few times, is picking it apart and go, right, well, where exactly did that go wrong? It won't be one specific area, it might be 2 or 3 small things that just all kind of went wrong together and made it painful experience, but you have to go back over it. And I think part of doing a change is picking a small area, you know, trying to change it, iterate it as you go. But then you need to also make time to sit back and go, right, let's look back on that. What went right, what went wrong, and why for each area. And I think as humans, naturally, we're not good at doing that. So it is kind of a forced action for a long time, until it becomes ingrained in you. So for us as a business, VNC Automotive, we've recently added some hardware. We used to just do pure software. We're now doing hardware as well. But we didn't have anyone that really knew that much about hardware. We're all in software. So even the basics of holding stock, it fell to finance because it felt a little bit financy. But again, we've never put those controls and those procedures in place, and it was, you know, a little bit down the road, and thought, yeah, let's do a stock take. Oh God, like, where are all of these units? People have just been taking them. And actually that's quite a major fail if you look at processes and controls of, you know, you've got some stock over there, you've got some stock with that person over there, and you don't know where that is. So whilst it might seem quite painful, we went back over that, we changed a lot. And we're still iterating it as well. It will never end, which seems a bit daunting in itself. But yeah, so I think what we really need to do is factor that sort of failure time, thinking about failure, into the actual process of making the change.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that, Becky. And I guess that helps with what you were talking about, the safe space as well, because if there is that culture of learning from failure, it feels more comfortable if things don't go right, because then it's an opportunity to learn from it and make it better next time, isn't it? So that's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's brilliant. And I know something else that we talked about, you and I, was recruitment as well, about what's going on at recruitment at the minute and the war on talent. And I think you had some thoughts on that, given the news from the data back on Tuesday this week about the lowest unemployment levels since 1974. So perhaps you could just share some thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a tough time. Everything's changing at the moment, isn't it? I think everyone thought, oh, just come out of this pandemic and then we'll be all okay again. But actually, we're still having massive amounts of change in our day-to-day lives as well as our working lives. And yeah, as you referred to, there was some data that came out about the really, really low levels of unemployment. And I've been speaking to some my contacts that are in recruitment as well, and they are saying the war on talent is definitely still here. We are finding it very hard to get people into the that they want. A lot of the time people aren't wanting to move as much as they were, potentially because there's so much change everywhere else. They would just like a little bit of stability in one area of their life, if nowhere else. So I was looking at this from a recruitment side, also someone that, you know, employs people, but also a side of data literacy and where this is going. And I think obviously we might all agree, because we're on this call, but data literacy is very important, but very important for our teams to upskill them, to keep them very relevant. We don't want our teams to be going, oh, well, this company over here is going to give me loads of training data, and that's a really exciting place to be right now. So that might just turn my head in a market that's a little bit tricky right now. So by offering courses such as yourselves run, actually it's not just upskilling with, you know, the usual sort of courses at AAT, ACCA, etc. It's actually giving people that edge, and that edge that wants to stay with you, whilst keeping, you know, ourselves relevant by going on the courses as well. So I think we maybe at danger of just looking at this from how we're working kind of point of view, but we need to also consider how we're going to keep our staff, keep them happy, and keep them, you know, really up to date with knowledge.
That's fantastic. Yeah, thank you for that insight, Becky. That's such a good point. And it makes me think of what Craig was saying earlier about smilier people as well, with the work we can do and the value we can add. So that's fantastic. So thank you. That's great. Well, perhaps if we could just open up to the chat box, if anyone's got any questions you'd like to, or any comments you haven't yet added. I know there's been some various thoughts on the chat already. Please do add them into the chat now, any questions you've got. So yeah, over to everyone who's joined us today. Thank you. So do put your questions in chat. And just while I'm giving you an opportunity to type, perhaps we could just go to Craig, because Craig, you put a comment in chat actually. So perhaps you could just talk that through for us, your comment about complex projects with lots of governance.
Yeah. I've set up MIBI, whatever you want to call them, teams in a number of organisations, and it always takes time to get the projects stood up that Mark and Becky were talking about. To earn the right to do that, to create the credibility, there's a lot of micro interventions that you can create just by engaging with decision makers. Things like the stuffed monkey on the boardroom table, taking their chairs away, just sitting and listening to people, understanding where they're getting their data from today, how they're using it to make the decision, perhaps suggesting a couple of changes to the charts they use or the tables they use, or how it's presented, so that the data comes out more effectively, more aligned for what they need. While you're doing all that, you're building your relationships with the business, you're building the credibility that you've got, so that when you go into the project change board and say, I'd like this amount of money to do this, because it's the extension of the journey that you've already started creating in the business.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much for explaining that. That's brilliant. That's great. And also, I've just seen James has just posted a picture for us, James Berry. So thank you very much for that. The traditional waterfall process of building a car and a slightly smiley face. If you open it up, it's brilliant. The agile process of let's think about different ways to move. It's brilliant, whether it's a skateboard or a scooter or a motorbike or a bike or a car, and then the smiley faces to go with that. I really appreciate that. So fantastic. Thank you. And we've got a question from Mark Proctor. Do people think CFOs who like to play with the profit cause a big issue for data quality and machine learning? Gosh, would one of our speakers, one of you got any thoughts on that? So do people think CFOs would like to play with the profit? Do they cause a big issue for data quality and machine learning? Have you got some thoughts on that, Craig?
I think it goes back to this goes back to, are we making decisions with data or using data to inform the decisions? By the time you get CFO level and you're adjusting the story that you want to tell the markets through your annual profit, etc. The machine learning's already happened, the data quality is already there. Yeah, you've already got the insight, hopefully, that you can use to say, okay, like the example I gave with the bad debt provisions. Okay, we can look at it in a different way because of this. So therefore, we can tell the story in a different way. We can take a slightly different approach to what we did last year. So from that point of view, I think it helps. But by the time it gets to the storytelling level, then you're reliant primarily on the rest of the boards, the rest of the exec and the auditors saying, come on, yeah, that interpretation just is a little too at variant with how the regulators might have intended it. So I think the CFOs probably don't have as much impact as they think on data quality machine learning. They have an impact on how it gets used.
Thank you for your thoughts on that. I really appreciate that, Craig. That's brilliant.
Now, I was thinking, Louisa, actually, I'm a big believer. Sometimes when people ask questions, they're actually making statements. So I would ask if Mark's happy to actually contribute, because I'm guessing Mark has a view on this. And, Mark's very experienced in this area. So if he's happy to, I wondered if Mark himself might give his view on that question.
I'll just turn on my
morning, Mark.
Video camera. I don't know if you can see me. So a lot of times you see, so you get your data, and you might get something from that's more in a raw data format. You might get your stock system, you might get your or you might get something else that's coming from your sales system, and we're often therefore tracking transactions, and they are events that have happened. But when we start to look at finance and accounting data, so when you think about what's in your nominal ledger, that is often an amalgamation of definite hard facts, but then also all the accounting estimates and judgments that have been made along the way. So I think a lot of the time we try to use algorithms and machine learning to, what's our profitability going to be? What are these elements going to be? But they've already been adjusted by so many things in that process. I think Craig's right in the fact when it comes to that machine learning piece, you've got to almost bring it back to your raw data and then build it back up from there. But often I think CFOs and people are trying to look at that higher level and go, right, what's my profit? What's my sales? But actually there's so many things that have gone into that you need to start lower and then build up, is what I think. So I just wanted to see what other people had thought about that.
Oh, thanks very much. It's great to hear your thoughts on that, Mark, isn't it? It makes me think of root cause analysis there, sort of digging down the 5 whys, so taking the high line profit, but digging down into the detail there, as you say, from the data to get some more detailed analysis there. So it's a tricky balance, isn't it? And I think it's something with thinking about dashboards, for example, and what goes on them. It's easy to have a big level number, isn't it? But we do still need that detail, don't we, and that understanding. So yeah, it's that balance of how we present the information as well, thinking about the communication piece, which is so critical with this analysis. Well, thank you very much, everybody. It's been a really fascinating morning with all sorts we've discovered and discussed this morning. I'm struggling to be able to wrap up all the comments we've discussed actually in the summary, because there's so much we've touched on this morning. But I think we've thought about the whole process really, from the raw data and issues with cleaning and so on, right through to how we communicate it and the things we can do along the way with forecasting and fraud detection and the like, and managing risks and everything, the benefits there are. And we've had a good think about skills, haven't we, and how we can upskill and the benefits of upskilling, and thinking about retaining staff and recruitment as well, and thinking about the future. I think it's fascinating, everything we've covered. And something that stands out for me actually were the 4 steps that Joe mentioned about keeping it simple, making sure we know who the data owner is, the tools are easy to use, we encourage learning and empower, and that culture of encouraging questions. I think maybe that's sort of summarises very neatly what we've talked about this morning. But I will just very quickly just ask Craig as well, because Craig had a fantastic analogy with oil and data literacy. So perhaps you could just talk us through that analogy in 30 seconds, if that's all right, Craig.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, for me, it's always helpful to, when I'm looking at something, to think about it in a different context, because it opens up different insights. So we're talking about data literacy here, but we've been in the oil age, the carbon age, for 130 years, whatever it is now. From an oil literacy point of view, how many people on the call have visited an oil rig and understand directional drilling? How many of the people that didn't say yes to that can fill their cars with diesel or petrol? How many drive those cars along tarmac roads? And how many can turn on an electric light at home without thinking about the oil-fired power station that generates the electricity? Now, I can say yes to those because I've worked in the Middle East, I've worked in power generation. But when you look at that from a data literacy point of view, does everyone need to know about ETL, data mesh, SQL, PySpark, random forests, etc.? Probably not. You can leave that to the deep tech or the data specialist. Do people need to know how to get the data they need when they need it? Yes, that's the petrol, filling your car with petrol. For driving, do they need to understand the encryption, tokenization, etc., how you move the data about, how you protect it? Probably not. Yeah, as long as they can as long as they can use it, as long as they can obey the road signs, not go above 30, etc., that's fine. And turning on electric lights at home, can you leverage the information for insights and get those light bulbs? Yes, that's something everyone needs.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much for that analogy. I really like that, the fact that we can fill up our cars with petrol or whatever it might be, or plug it in for electric without thinking too much about the source there. That's so true. It's a really, really great analogy. So I think that leaves us on a great note just to wrap up and say thank you very much to everybody for joining us today. Really appreciate it. And a big shout out to our speakers as well. I really appreciate you.